My name's Mark. I'm Chief Blockchain Officer at Shrapnel. In trying to think about what we do for this talk today, the talk is building omni-chain Web3 games. Share some of the experiences of things that we had to go build, things that we needed to go do, and some of the considerations that were there. I like to joke that I'm the largest manufacturer of weapons and cosmetics in Web3 right now. We're minting 50 million assets. We'll talk about that in manufacturing in a second. But seriously, it's a relatively small group. You get questions, we can make it interactive and take it from there. So, I'm wearing a Mercuri hoodie, and Saigo here is wearing a Shrapnel hoodie. So what is Mercuri and what is Shrapnel? So Shrapnel is a first-person shooter extraction game. Extraction means that the stakes are real, so you can get assets in the game. You get them out, you can sell them on a marketplace. If you bring assets in the game, you can lose them, and someone can pick them up and take them out, and they can sell them. So it's a lot of fun. If you haven't played it yet, we're doing something called the Shrapnel training exercises, which are basically 3-day play windows. If you have an extraction pack, you can play them. But it's fun to play and even more fun to watch. But when we started looking at this, and you'll see the things we had to go over the course of today, that there were a bunch of big rocks we had to go move and problems to solve. And we said, hey, if we're gonna have to solve them, can we help other games solve them too? And we made a decision, like literally the day that I joined, that anything that we would build would be a platform we make available to other folks. That's Mercuri. So if you hear us talk about Mercuri, it's the platform. If you hear us about Shrapnel, it's the game. The platform provides all the Web3 capabilities behind the scenes. Well, no, so I'll talk about it here. It plugs into the Unreal Engine. But a good analogy here is if you think about, I'll use Unreal in another context. If we think about certain things in gaming, right? You had the Unreal Engine and Unreal Tournament, right? Great first-person example of using a technology. When you had Xbox Live, you had Halo 2, and show people how to do multiplayer and how that would go work. So this is really about how do we bring Web3 to the gaming community. And so the other thing that's, I've been in, most of my career is in early stage technology, and Web3 is similar in that the people that are in early always have two things in common. A lot of religion and a high threshold for pain, right? It's like hey, because especially in Web3, it was like really difficult, it wasn't really well documented, things were moving really quickly. And so for the game developers, there's some people that were great in, say, DeFi that made games that weren't really great because they weren't really great games, right? The games weren't first. And you have people that were building games that try to do some things in Web3, and those didn't really work out because the learning curve is like 90 degrees. And so some of the SDKs that are out there take it from like 90 degrees to 75 degrees, but these guys want to focus on the fun. They don't want to know about EIPs and ERCs and ZKs. It's like alphabet soup to them, right? So everything we're doing is trying to make that easier for them. So let's talk about the world of Shrapnel and sort of what we had to go, like the problems, actually problems for me, this is a lot of fun as you'll see, that we had to go build for Shrapnel. So they're building a world, this is Tokyo 2038. In that world you have environments. Each of these things can be an NFT as well as an NFT that represents those things. You're gonna have outfits. Each of those things can be NFTs as well as being composed together. And your weapon isn't just a weapon, all the different pieces are there. Now, that introduces a lot of fun problems for me because if you think about an extraction shooter, if Saigo and I are both in a match, and he has a gun and I have a scope, and you kill him, and you take his gun, you kill me, you take my scope, and you put them together, you've just made a new NFT composite, right? And so we have to handle all of that in real time when you exit the match, and then you get back into the game really quickly. So we're doing a lot of robust stuff here. We've done some stuff on contracts we'll talk about in a minute. But if you want to do this level of engagement, we'll talk a lot about how you'll do that today. But a lot about a game isn't just about the game. It's about your community, and it's about your marketing team, right? And so we have tools where you can create stickers and skins and things like that. And so how do we enable creators to go do that, get that on the chain, and help them monetize it? And not just a sticker, but if we do a skin, you could have, we could use Saigo as an example. So Saigo and I both do stickers, and Lucian on the back decides to do a skin that combines those together. We have to do payment splits. So how do we get everybody paid out for that? And then on the marketing side, we chose Avalanche as our chain. I'll tell you why as we go through the conversation today. But our marketing team wanted to have certain things that launched on Ethereum, on Avalanche, on Polygon. That comic books are on Avalanche, for example, but our operators are on Ethereum. And so we had to not just have support for all these things, but index all these chains as well. And so we had to be able to support any chain that they wanted for these different marketing activities. So in terms of decals, we have a sticker creator. And so one of the interesting things here is this little rattlesnake head here. Someone figured out if you squish it and you stretch it, it looks like a paintbrush. And people are painting scenes from The Lion King and stuff like that, doing really cool stuff. And the goal here is enabling creators to create content they can take to any game. They have an asset that is an omni-chain asset they can put in multiple games, not multiple chains. Now, I like doing stuff that people say they can't do, and it's like, oh, that's never going to work, and go into other games. And so you can see here, this is in our game. That's in a low-poly snowboarding game. It's a snowboard. It's on the back of a set of cards over here. Now, the thing is that, and we'll talk about this in content, this is applying to multiple games, but we'll also talk about variants of assets that people wanted to do as well. But we want to make sure that you can mint these, you can move them around to different games and different chains. Okay, so to do all that, what were the sort of the key considerations we had? And this is going to be the bulk of the talk, sort of talking about the areas we need to go take a look at and the problems that need to be solved as we went. So they really break down into content, commerce, community, and chain. And then you were asking about Unity or Unreal earlier. So there's game engines, Unity and Unreal, but then you also have what are called gaming backends, which are going to be your PlayFabs, your Excel bytes, and Beamable. So while these give you the engine to create the games, these are the folks that do things like leaderboards and matchmaking and accounts and those sorts of things. And you've got DAOs over here where people want to have access to data. And you've also got creator rewards pools we'll talk about as we go through. Okay, so for content, we've got a couple of examples here. You're going to have like your equipped character. So if it's a game like ours, it looks a little bit more hardcore. But also you got stuff here in the casual and mobile space. You got characters over here. You get inventory. All these things really are just versions of filtered inventory. So you have to build the inventory and sort of show that in a filtered way. These are some examples of different types of NFTs that we had to put together. Or that these are not all from our game. This one is. It's creating a gamer tag. But you can see different types of NFTs you want to have in gaming. Right? So this is one we're sort of buying. This is just showing different types of weapons that you can buy. These are character NFTs, really boring, but in mobile. But you can see here, we're going to buy these with Shrap. We'll move to the next one in a second. This is cosmetic NFTs. So you can have stickers, skins, things of that nature where you can mix and match and make these and sort of sell them. These are often, if you're not familiar with gaming, called cosmetics.
You can fight with that at Shrapnel?
Not in the first release. These are composites, right? So you're building this character to have all these things in there. This is our marketplace, where you want to be able to expose things out, all with APIs that sort of pull from the different items you have and list them for sale. It's your profile. This is our comic book. So this is, how can you go ahead and bring your NFTs in here? So one of the things with gaming that's actually, it's really inexpensive to do comic books. But people who do comic books for their games actually sell a lot more games because people get really involved in the lore. So we did that with ours. This is the first version of the comics. And so these are all NFTs that have access to various comics. And we have, this is a collectible. This is a utility NFT that we've done, which is for our characters. And the comic book has like a specialized reader. And then we'll end, I think we'll double click into that. And then, of course, you wouldn't have anything if you didn't have achievements, right? So we need to look at all these different types of assets as we went. So when we created these assets, they needed to be multi-chain, as I talked about, multi-game, and then multi-genre, right? And so the other thing people would say is, you can't offer these in other games because they won't look the same, right? It's a different design style, that sort of thing. We built our own service for metadata, and so you'll actually be able to have something that you would normally see in OpenSea or in contracts, but you can also have a variation that says /8-bit or /GameX, or what have you. Okay, so what are some of the things we need to go build? So we needed and we're going to go into sort of the contract pieces we did for this in a second. We wanted items, inventory, sticker skins, badges, metadata. We just talked about metadata. Manufacturing, so as I said earlier, we're doing 50 million NFTs. We have a chain that does 300 transactions per second, right? And we're doing these training exercises for 3 days, but in production, I've got all these NFTs I need to build. I have a marketplace I need to have transactions going. And then I also have to do the live game and get people in and out. So when you've got 300 transactions per second, you've got to manufacture a lot of stuff in advance and just change the owners and things like that. And there's when you're building a game like this that you want to use the chain a lot, I took out like magic and misdirection. So you have to do some stuff in the database and figure out for your game what needs to be on the chain right away, what needs to be on the chain soon, and what needs to be on chain at a certain point. So if you want to sell it, for example, you may have to change ownership. If you want to put it into if you want to bridge it out or sell it, you have to take ownership, and you'll have to do stuff on chain. Crafting. So So we built stuff out for crafting, and so this is, if I have NFT1 plus NFT2 and NFT3, can I get NFT4? But also look at that in conjunction with metadata. So think about what you want to go do with that there. Provenance is really interesting. Airdrops, awards, and you'll see other stuff for battle passes in commerce. If you sort of break things out in a game like that you want to go build, and really just get it down to the primitives, like if these things are true, on this cadence, deliver these things to people who qualify. If you do that, you have an engine that powers airdrops, awards, community reward pools, and other things like that. So we built some assets here that are super helpful, but really sort of break it down that way. And then notifications end up becoming incredibly important, because if you've got a asset that's on chain, and if there's an ownership change there, you can't list it for sale, or if you list it for sale, you can't bring it into a game where you can equip it. And so understanding how you build notifications across these things is really important. Okay, so let's talk about the contract. So we didn't just want to have title and description and an image, right? We want to have a bunch of behaviors. I call them the IBLs, right? So it's applyable, which is a cosmetic you can apply to a weapon. Bridgeable, bundleable, composable, consumable. So a lot of different pieces of functionality in here that we've built into our contracts, but we also know that these things are going to change over time, because people, the downside that I've seen historically is when you go from something relatively simple to something more advanced, people are like, oh, then I want this other thing. So once they see more, they want more. And so we use this thing called a diamond standard, an 1155 contract. So we can put all of our assets inside of a diamond. The diamond allows us to make updates after the fact, because you'll find certain efficiencies you want to get. It supports fungible, non-fungible. It's extensible and upgradable. And then we've integrated the OFT standard. I know the layer 0 guys are going to be here tomorrow. It allows us to have bridging that we can get out to other chains. Commerce. Okay, so there's marketplace that everyone's familiar with. And so marketplaces typically sell in your token. For the subscriptions we can sell in fiat, as well as in token. And then rewards, these are things that we pay out based on various criteria. So right now we're doing mission rewards. And so if you kill 5 people in one of our STXs, or you do these sorts of things, we're going to go ahead and issue you some awards into your wallet automatically. So to do that, what are some of the things you need to do in the commerce space? So one is fiat onboarding. So I love Avalanche subnets, and that's what we're using right now. If I want to do fiat onboarding, it's a bit of a challenge, because I have to go, but I'll tell you there's the answer to that, because there's some folks in the room over there that can help you. Because you want to convert from, say, US dollars to Shrapnel currency. Most people won't do that for you, based on regulatory. And so what they told me is, like, I've talked to a couple different folks, like, well, here's what you can do. You can do something to convert to USDC and then go over here and do a swap. Like, you guys have to remember, like, my audience can include like 16-year-old kids, right? And so I always think, like, what happens when Toby, one of our personas, says, hey mom, can you go create this wallet? And then once you create that wallet, can you go ahead and put your credit card in and then buy USDC and then convert it over here? She's gonna say, here's $60, go play Call of Duty and forget this crypto thing. So we have to make it super, super easy to get money into the game so people can buy stuff and play and things like that. Now the challenge is that not only can I not do that, or is that more difficult, because I'm in a subnet, most of the people that do that exchange do it outside of the subnet. And so basically it'll do it as an Avalanche seed. So I've got the money on the edge of town and then I have to get it inside. So it's typically a lot of work, and we sort of spec'd it out. And then fortunately we talked to the folks over here at Halliday, who are actually helping us integrate right now, that'll do all that for us in a way that's actually really user-friendly. So Toby can buy that with his mom, and it's like, oh, it just looks like a regular online purchase. For Marketplace, we went ahead and used the Rarible contracts. So Rarible contracts are open source. They are audited. We went and built our own APIs on it. We wanted to do APIs a little bit differently. We can go do that. Fees. I'm going to circle back to that when we get to the chain bit in a second. Payments, and so handling payments for different things inside of that. I can take crypto, or I can use Stripe for cash payments, but only for certain things. Royalties and payments, let's get really kind of interesting. So royalties are relatively straightforward. Hey, I've made this thing, and there's usually a place where you can go ahead and send the royalty. But if we have the scenario earlier, like the skin that was created, I have multiple creators that are there. And so then I really need to have a royalty that points to an address that points to a payment slip. And so we use 0x splits, which is open source, that works really well for us there. It also allows us to do things if you have maps where you want to do pay for performance. It's not just for royalties, payment splits can go and sort that out as well. For subscriptions, those are things you can sign up for that will help you get certain things on certain cadences. So I talked earlier about, hey, there's an award engine that every so often checks these metrics. If you own a subscription, give them this stuff. Quests are what I talked about earlier, where if you meet these conditions, kill 5 people, play 5 games, you get something. Dropshipping, I'm not going to talk about. Redemptions, you can issue different NFTs out to folks. They can go bring those to redeem inside of your game. So because we index on all the other chains, whether it's Avalanche, Ethereum, Polygon, whatnot, we can go ahead and get current status that you own these things and do redemptions and data analytics. And so understanding what's going on with all of this. So we've also built our own indexer, which we'll talk about in a second. So we've got the ability to get money in. We've got the ability to do content. Now we've got to get people into the game, right? And so people will have profiles, and there'll be individuals and organizations. Organization can be a guild, and so people will have, like in our game, we call it a MEF, and they'll have shared assets that are there. The content, I'm not sure if you saw it on the slide earlier, it's an organization exclusive, right? So if you make a uniform for your organization, your MEF, your clan, whatever, you can make it so you can't lose that to somebody who's not in your group, right? So we'll protect that for you. So you get individuals and organizations, and they can have different roles. So when you have like a shared treasury or a shared vault or whatever you call it in your game, making sure you've got rules that are there. And then we also have AML and KYC, which are anti-money laundering and know your customer. So anti-money laundering, when we talk about wallets, we start with a custodial wallet. And so we create that behind the scenes that people don't need to worry about. And then you can also link your non-custodial wallets as well. So if you're Toby, you don't know anything about Web3, it just works like any other game. If you're Toby, once he starts getting into Web3 or you're dying Web3, you can start linking your MetaMask and other wallets that are there. And then we'll actually look for ownership of assets in all of those wallets. But when you link those external wallets, we check any money laundering with chain analysis behind the scenes to make sure that this is not someone who's a sanctioned actor and things like that. So they're not trying to launder money through our exchange. If you want to take money out and do certain things there, we're liable to do what's called Know Your Customer. There's a company called SumSub to go do that. For proposals, voting, and reputation, these are sort of services or proposals, voting, and reward pools. These are things we do with foundations. And so we have a foundation for our game called Radon. And so Radon has a reward pool. We have to use that awards engine with them. So we have to be able to facilitate other people using our engines to give things out. And it worked just as well for them as Mountain Dew. We got sponsors and things like that. Okay, so now let's get to chain. So I'll tell you this about Avalanche. So I worked at Microsoft. I was their blockchain guy. I launched a bunch of services there, and I was at Consensus. And when I came to Shrapnel, I talked to a lot of chains. I hadn't talked to Avalanche. And they're like, can you talk to them? I know you've worked at these other chains. I said, okay. And I came in super skeptical. Clearly I'm on them, so there's a good story here. And then as I looked at it, I said, hey, this is really thoughtful. This is really smart. And I kept finding that they didn't just do some random EVM chain. They actually really understood what the business problems were and the conditions that people want to go in them, and they executed on those. So we picked Avalanche for our game, but I didn't need to support multi-chain support, add multi-chain support. So we used Layer 0 to go do that. The other thing for games that's really important is how you handle gas, right? So I looked at the numbers, and if you want to build like the Call of Duty for Web3, and you look at the numbers that are there, it's a lot of transactions. The other thing is when you look at a game that's free to play, it's very different than DeFi. Really, really different than DeFi. So in DeFi, a lot of the transactions are going to be explicit. I want to swap this. I want to buy this. So on and so forth, this NFT. And so they're all initiated by the user. But if you think about our game, there's a lot of implicit transactions that the user's not necessarily doing all the time. So I'm going to go into a match. I got to put that into escrow because if you're in a match, putting it for risk, you can't sell. And when you come out, I got to do settlement. And there's a bunch of things that there, and you don't want like MetaMask windows popping up left, right, and center, right? And so when they do pop up, you don't want to have to go and pay gas fees all the time. Because for us as the game, doing the implicit transactions is a lot of money. So working with Avalanche, we were able to divorce the gas token from the utility token. And also working with Layer 0, doing the same thing. And so what that meant is that I could print infinite gas on my subnet, which basically means gas was free for me. But then I could use a ERC20 utility token for people to pay for actions inside of my network. And also work with Layer 0 can be used for payment for bridging out. And so that really, that was a fundamental change, and this goes to a testament to the Avalanche team. When I presented that to them, like when I presented it to our VCs, it took a couple of rounds with them because it was so counterintuitive to what we've been doing previously. But the Avalanche folks put it in for us, and that allows us a lot of flexibility. So we can do pretty much anything, whether it's for our game or for people building on Mercury. And so you can say, all right, but I'll still charge you a fee, so you can get the transaction fee where it makes sense. It also allows you to have flexibility to do, hey, I want to do fee-free February or fee-free Friday or anything like that. You've got a lot more control over it, and you can actually build a game that interacts with the chain a lot because you're not at the whim of what other people are doing on the network or whatever traffic is there. Now, when we do stuff on other chains, we can do sponsored transactions for that. Data indexing is something we had to build, and there's some great examples of how to do that out there. There's also Glacier from the Avalanche team. But blockchain is great for trust and transparency. It's horrible for querying, right? And so if you want to get that into an off-chain store and then intermix it with your metadata, building a good indexer is key, or getting access to one is there in your queryable off-chain replica. Bridging I already talked about, and then notifications. And so a lot of times in games, you'll get something what's called an entitlement, right? So if you own or operate an NFT, that means you get to play early, for example, right? And so, but if you sell that, you don't get to play early anymore, right? And so part of the indexing is understanding these user change events, ownership change events, because it may impact what you get to have access to in the game, and then you flow that through to your inventory and a number of things that are there. We're also working on doing this with not just our NFTs, but other NFTs. But all things you want to think about with chain, the good news is that Avalanche has done a great job here. The other thing, I touched on it earlier, is depending on how you want to interact with the chain, and there are a couple models I'll talk about now, if you want to do it a lot, or you have a lot of transactions that will eventually go to the chain, really understanding like what has to go there now, what has to go there soon, and what really has to go with these exit points. But when you think about when you want to interact with the chain, it really is, there are a couple different models that I'm seeing people use, right? So one is, I have a game, actually before I get to that, let me tell you one of the things for games in terms of how they're distributed, right? So Epic Game Store will distribute games that are crypto. Steam will not, Hyperplay will, right? Epic Game Store won't let you distribute them in South Korea or China. Hyperplay will, right? And so you've got to look at like how can I go ahead and launch these games out in different ways, and what are sort of the rules for how I'm going to go do that as you go, and then look at how am I going to interact with the chains through that I'm sort of swimming game as I deployed it out. So some people will say, hey, I will only interact in a way that you go to a website for. And so if you want to get into Xbox or other places, you're going with a game that's deployed inside of those environments. There's a separate website you do all your interactions with. In another case, what you'll do is you'll have it be a Windows desktop game, and that Windows desktop game is actually going out and interacting on the back end with things, but only periodically. I've heard people call it like a check-in and check-out model, so periodically you'll just update what's there when you want to go do something with it. And there are games like ours where you'll go in pretty heavily on how you move forward. You go in pretty heavily in terms of interacting with a fair bit. So I talked earlier about like gaming backends, and so how would you interact with a gaming backend? So this is important if you're going to build out on like a Beamable or a PlayFab, which I'll talk about briefly here. So depending on how you want to integrate with Beamable, Beamable is actually more Web3 friendly, like natively. So we see a lot of folks that are starting from Web3 come here, and so you can configure your chains inside of Beamable. For wallets, you basically have one created for the game, and then creation for players is optional, because you want to have sponsored wallets for sponsored transactions in some cases. They have an inventory service, so basically there's an inventory service you interact with, and something will happen here. We'll talk about it a little bit more on the PlayFab slide next. But this will basically say, hey, when something happens over here, you've got sort of federation that will say, go take this action on the other side. And then items are granted to users using the Beamable inventory service. So go ahead and get those out into their wallets in that way. PlayFab here, you're going to see that it's a similar model where something happens in the game, there are events that you can hook into. There's also ways for you to write script that will send it back. So things like around item creation, item updates, item sale, item transfers, and various events that are coming in through each of those things. So this is my shameless recruitment slide. We're hiring right now, so if anyone knows anybody who's looking, if you're looking, you can talk to us afterwards. We also have some great swag outside if you're looking for it. And then just finishing up here on Q&A. And I'm going to step over here out of the sun, being down. Are there any questions that I can answer for folks? Sure, in the back.
You said you're doing 300 TPS, so I'm like curious what that gas per second is on each.
I'd have to go back and take. I mean, the nice thing is because we, I can get you the stats for that, but because it's gasless for us, we don't really pay as much because we have infinite gas. We don't. It doesn't something that we track actively. The one thing I forgot to talk about gas is we also have something we call Shrapnel clause that delivers gas to all the good girls and boys out in the Shrapnel ecosystem. So we always make sure that your accounts have gas behind the scene. Sure.
Do you guys have an embedded wallet within the game?
So we have a custodial wallet that's created right now. We have support right now for both Fireblocks and right now we've got Stardust in test, and then we have the ability to map other wallets in.
The escrow feature for the assets, you guys did that, or that's part of the US?
So it's part of the contract that we created, and so yeah. So we put a lot of stuff into the contract. Again, with the thinking we're going to go solve this problem for other people, we put a lot of investment there. We also track things like state on the items. So I didn't talk about this earlier, but you could put something in, like we have user-generated content. If it's something that's in there that's offensive that you've minted, we can say we don't want to let you play it, but if you paid for it, it's yours. And so we'll just sort of put different states in there if it's under review, or if it's in use right now inside of a game, or if it's equipped for your character, that sort of thing, and then games can take certain actions.
But what kind is that the ERC 1.1
Yeah.
that you showed? That's that contract?
Yes.
Trying to get that?
Yeah.
What's the ERC schedule again?
So ERC 1155 basically was designed for games, and then we added a heck of a lot into it. We actually are, sorry. We added a lot of functionality into it to handle certain scenarios like that. We were actually hitting the upper limits of what could be done, and so we've been sort of slicing and sort of modifying as we go. But really, it's tracking the state, and so if depending on the state, you won't be able to do transfers. Any questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, sure.
You mentioned Avalanche has been quite good at supporting you. Is there anything that they can do better to the team to grow and sort of thing?
Honestly?
They put you on the spot.
No, and listen, I'm a guy who's happy to ask for free stuff or to Tom Sawyer people to go do stuff for me. We meet with Lucian and the team on a really regular basis. They get us everything we need when we, here's what I tell people at Ava Labs. Like, I'm like your biggest non-paid evangelist right now, right? Is when I bring stuff to you that makes logical sense and has data behind it, people say, yeah, that makes sense. And they go and do it. And I'm really excited about, the one thing that you could do is, can I get more transactions per second? But that's why I'm talking with Patrick afterwards about HyperVM. Yeah, I mean, so for us, I'd really like to have us on, so the thing is with AAA games, it's a multi-year cycle, right? So we're coming out at the beginning of next year in general availability. I would like when that happens to be a best-in-class example of using HyperVM with the level of transactions I expect we're going to do. But yeah, I would ask for stuff like, you give me free money, I guess, but other than that, we're all good. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.